What if I told you that some of the most devastating grief a person can experience has nothing to do with death? What if the person you are mourning is still walking around, still breathing, and still very much alive, and yet completely absent from your life? This is the reality of family estrangement. And today I want to talk to you about something most people never really understand until they live it themselves, which is that this kind of grief is unlike anything you will ever face. I'm a chartered psychologist and I've spent years specializing in family estrangement, and I have personal lived experience. I sit with people through the hardest part of it, helping them make sense of what they have lost and when it is wanted and possible, helping them to find a way back towards each other. But I need to be honest with you from the very start. I don't know this only from textbooks or from the therapy room. I know it because I've lived it. I've sat in that place of grief myself. I know what it is to mourn someone who is still alive, to go looking for closure that the world has no idea how to give you, and to carry a loss that comes with no funeral, no cards through the door, and no one quite knowing what to say. So much of what I share with you today, I know both from both sides, as the psychologist and as the person living it. And I'm going to keep being honest with you about that as we go. So, today I want to try and give you something that I think is genuinely useful. I want to help you understand what is actually happening when you grieve someone that you're estranged from and why this particular kind of loss cuts so deep. And then I want to give you some real practical guidance and the kind of thing that actually helps. So we've got a lot to get through. So stay with me to the end because the final part of this video contains something that might genuinely change how you see your own situation and what might still be possible for you. So, okay, let me start with what this grief actually is. There is a name for it. There's a researcher called Pauline Boss, and she calls it ambiguous loss. And for the first time, when I understood that idea, something settled inside me because it finally gave me a name to what I was feeling. Ambiguous loss is grief with no clear ending, no moment where everyone agrees it's over, no ritual to walk you through it. It comes in two forms. Sometimes the person is gone from your life, but still alive in your mind and everywhere in your thoughts. Sometimes the person is right there in front of you, but the relationship you had is just gone. It's not there. Estrangement has both at once more often than not. And that is the part that makes it so confusing and so painful. So let me just slow this down because the next point to me is the single most important idea in this whole video. It's the thing that explains why this grief hurts the way it does. So when a grandparent dies, for example, the world knows what to do. Think about everything that arrives almost on its own. I don't know, people might bring food to your door, work might give you time off. There's a funeral, there's a gathering, a moment where everyone stops and says out loud, this mattered, this is sad. People know how to look at you, they kind of roughly know what to say. And we've spent many thousands of years building all of that around death, these rituals, a whole set of rituals that quietly tell the grieving person, you're allowed to fall apart. You can have this moment. We'll hold you while you do that. Now, hold that picture in your mind and look at what happens with estrangement instead. When you stop talking to a parent, or if they stop talking to you, or when you have to make the agonizing decision to step away from a family member, there is none of that. There is no funeral, no gathering, no time off, no one bringing food to your door, no one knowing what on earth to say to you. Nobody treats it as a real loss. Half the time, the people around you don't even realize you're grieving. That's even if you open up and share the fact that this has happened to you. So to say things like that lands like little cuts, families sort themselves out in the end, or why don't you just pick up the phone if that might be the sort of thing, that response that you do get if you open up. So, and this is what's at the heart of it. Bereavement comes with centuries of support built around it. Estrangement, on the other hand, comes with silence. You're carrying a loss that is every bit as heavy. In fact, I would argue heavier, and you're carrying it almost completely alone. And I've told you I've lived this, not just studied it. And so this is where I want to be honest about where that comes from. I'm estranged from my own mother. In the end, that was my decision. And I made that for my own well-being. And it's not something I did lightly or quickly, but I've also been on the other side of it. So a few years ago, my cousin cut off contact with me. Um, and I need you to understand what she meant to me. She wasn't just a distant relative that I saw at weddings. She was like a sister to me. We grew up in and out of each other's houses. We confided in each other. We were there for each other. We had a lot of shared experiences. And then one day that was simply gone. And to this day, I don't fully understand why. And that not knowing has been one of the most painful things I've carried. So when I talk about this grief, please know I'm not talking about it from the outside. There is a particular cruelty in mourning someone who still exists in the world. Your brain is built for connection. From the day you're born, it is wired to reach for the people you love. And that doesn't just switch off because they're gone or you've chosen to leave. Your brain still keeps searching. It knows they're out there somewhere. I still catch myself thinking of my cousin and the loss of our children knowing one another and being close. When someone dies, there's a terrible finality to it. And as awful as that is, it's the thing that slowly lets your mind begin to accept it. With estrangement, you don't get that. Instead, you live in a strange limbo in between place. You watch a birthday come and go. You hear about a family event that you weren't part of or invited to. You drive past an old street and the grief just floors you out of nowhere. There's lots of reminders and memories. It's not a tidy process. It doesn't move neatly on from one stage to the next, and it keeps circling back. You know, I find, I feel ambushed at Christmas, birthdays, on just ordinary mornings. Perhaps a photo pops up on my feed of us. There's another layer here that almost nobody's talking about, and it's the grief that arrives before the loss has even happened. Because if you are estranged from a parent, especially a parent who's getting older as well, there is also a clock ticking in the back of your mind that you can't switch off. I mean, I think it's true with all family members that that clock is ticking, lost time, lost, opportunities to be together. And some part of you knows that one day that other person actually will die. And so there's a part of you that knows there's a real chance the estrangement will still be there when that happens, when they get sick or when they die, and that you may never reconcile. And that the last words that perhaps you uttered between you might have already been said. And there's a name for that too. It's called anticipatory grief, mourning a loss that you can see coming before it's actually arrived. And I live with a version of that myself, particularly when I think about my mother. And it's a strange, really heavy thing to hold. Now, I want to talk about shame as well, because estrangement carries a kind of shame that grief after death simply does not. When someone dies, the world is kind to you. When you're estranged, there's often, or there can be, a quiet judgment instead. People want to know whose fault it was. They want a tidy story that is much simpler than the truth ever is. And if you have lived through an estrangement, you know the truth is almost never simple. Let me tell you about someone I worked with. I've changed the details, so it's anonymous, but she'd made the decision to step away from her mother. She'd struggled with alcohol for most of her life. She did it to protect herself, and she did it to protect her children. On paper, she knew it was the right call, it was the right decision, but she came to me carrying something she could barely even say out loud. Somewhere inside, she had caught herself thinking that it would be a relief when her mother finally was gone. And that horrified her. She felt like a monster. She spent so much energy and time torturing herself, going round and over her decision, asking what kind of person thinks that about their own mother. So I wanted to say to her and to anyone watching who's ever had a thought like that, you aren't a monster. That feeling doesn't mean you're cruel. It doesn't mean you never loved them. It's what happens when a person has been in pain for a very, very long time. And a part of them is just simply longing for that pain to stop and just want to stop torturing themselves. It's one of the most common feelings I see in this work and one of the most hidden because the shame around it is just so enormous. And saying it out loud to someone safe is so often the beginning of putting it down. That shame runs really deep, and there's a reason it goes so deep. From the moment we're born, we're built for connection. Our earliest relationships in our family aren't just where we learn to feel love, they are where we first learn who we are and what to expect from other people. So when one of those relationships breaks, it doesn't only hurt, it shakes something right at the core and center of who you are. And that's why people in this situation ask themselves such enormous, painful questions. Who am I without this relationship? Where do I even belong now? I'll be honest with you, these were once my questions too. And sometimes I do feel lost. There's a grief expert called David Kessler, and he talks about how grief needs to be witnessed. It needs to be seen and named by other people. But with estrangement, there's so often no one there to witness it, because the people who would normally gather around you are the very people at the center of the loss. And for example, when my cousin cut contact and stopped speaking to me, I could hardly hold a funeral for someone who's still alive. So you end up carrying it quietly on your own without the things that normally hold us when we grieve. And that, more than anything, is why I do the work I do now. And Pauline Boss, she named all of this, and she says something that really matters here. With this kind of loss, the goal isn't always to resolve it, because a clean resolution may never come. It might stay open-ended. What changes instead is your relationship with the not knowing. You move from being frozen by it to being able to live alongside it, and eventually to find meaning even inside it. That's a completely different task from the one we're usually handed with grief. And it needs a completely different kind of support. So let me get into the practical side now, because I know that's what many of you are here for. So these are the things I have seen help the most in my work with clients, and honestly, in my own life too. So the first and the most important is this: name it. So many people in this situation have never let themselves call it grief. There is a voice inside that says, I shouldn't feel this much because no one died. That voice is wrong. What you are going through is a real loss. In some ways, it is harder than a death. And for all the reasons we've been talking about: no closure, no recognition, no ending. So give yourself the same kindness you would give a friend grieving a death. Say the words, I am grieving this. It's real and it deserves to be taken seriously. The second thing is find the right kind of support. One of the most damaging things in estrangement grief is ending up with people who just don't get it. Friends who push you to reconcile or to cut them off for good before you're anywhere near ready. People who make it sound simple or who pile their own family stuff onto yours. If you can, find a therapist who really understands estrangement and the particular grief it brings. It's not ordinary bereavement, and it really does benefit from someone who knows this terrain. Third, try to make peace with the not knowing instead of forcing an ending. It is so human to want to slam the door shut, either to decide it's over forever or to throw yourself at reconnecting before the time is right. Often both of these are really just attempts to escape the discomfort of not knowing how it ends. Learning to sit with that, to say, I don't know how this turns out, and I can survive not knowing. It's one of the most powerful things you'll ever do. Fourth, look after your body. Grief is not just something that happens in your head, it lives in the body. There's a grief therapist, Gina Moffa, who writes really powerfully about this, about how loss shows up physically in our muscles, our breath, our sleep, our gut. And when you're carrying an unresolved loss, your body is often working overtime, swinging between feeling wound up and feeling completely shut down. Let me give you a picture of what I mean. I worked with someone once who turned up convinced she was, in her words, just bad at coping. What we slowly realised was that her body had been holding the estrangement for years. Her shoulders sat up around her ears, her breath was shallow and high in her chest, and the grief had quietly moved into her body and was now trapped there. And when she started very gently and slowly to work with her body, not just her thoughts, things began to shift inside. She would, I would know, I would notice where you feel this in your own body. Most people, once they look, can point to it. Simple things: breathing, walking, movement, time outside in fresh air. These are not small, silly things to do. They're real ways to help your body feel safe again. And that genuinely helps you carry what you're carrying. Fifth, make your own rituals. One of the cruelest things about this kind of loss is that there's no ritual for it. As we've said, there's no ceremony, no gathering, no marker to help you move from one chapter to the next. So remember what I said earlier, bereavement comes with all that support built around it, and estrangement comes with silence. Well, this is where you get to build a little of that for yourself, because we are actually very good at creating meaning when we choose to. It might mean writing a letter you never send. It might mean doing something gentle and deliberate on the hard anniversaries instead of just gritting your teeth and getting through them. I do this myself. At the time of year, my cousin stopped speaking to me. I would just brace and dread it and endure it. Now I mark it on purpose in a small, private way that's mine. It doesn't make the grief disappear, but it gives the grief somewhere to go. Sixth, be careful with the story you tell yourself. That it's something I have learned as a psychologist and in my own life. The story you tell about what happened is not set in stone. It can change. A story that starts out as pure blame of them or of yourself can slowly become something fuller, something truer, a story with room for grief and anger and compassion and the possibility of growing all at the same time. So this isn't about excusing things that were genuinely harmful. It's about telling a story big enough to hold the truth instead of one that collapses either into you beating yourself up or into bitterness. Seventh, and this one matters enormously, try to separate two things that get tangled together at the same time. Your healing and whether or not you reconcile. These are two different journeys, and mixing them up causes so much suffering. You can do deep, real work on your grief, on who you are, on building a full and connected life, no matter what eventually happens with the other person. Your healing does not depend on them changing. It does not depend on reconciliation ever happening. It depends on you being supported to make sense of all of this and to slowly rebuild your relationship with yourself and with the world. So before we reach the end now, I want to leave you with one idea that I come back to again and again. I mentioned Gina Moffa, the grief therapist, earlier, and she wrote a book with the title I've Not Forgotten. Moving on does not mean letting go. I think that about that line so often with estrangement, because most people believe they only have two options. Either you force a reconciliation or you cut the person out of your heart completely and call it moving on. But there is a third way. You can move forward, you can heal, you can build a good life and still carry the love and even the hope somewhere inside you. Moving on doesn't mean letting go. I will not pretend any of this is painless. The pain is real and it is serious and it deserves to be taken seriously. But I've seen in my own life and in the lives of the people I've worked with that moving through this grief, really through it, not around it, can change your relationship with yourself, with other people, and with what actually matters to you. There is something on the other side of this, even when you cannot see it from where you are standing right now. Now, here is what I want to leave you with. And this is the part I promised would be worth staying for. So before I say it, I want you to slow down with me for just a second. Because the research on whether estranged families ever come back together shows something incredibly important. It's not what most people assume. The biggest factor in whether an estranged relationship can be repaired or not is not how long the estrangement has gone on. It is not even what caused it. It is this. The single biggest factor is whether at least one person in that relationship has done some real, honest work on themselves about their side of what happened. Just one person. Not to take all the blame, not to build a case against anyone, but to genuinely understand their own part in it. The patterns, the old wounds, the way the relationship kept breaking down. And I want you to just hold that for a moment, because out of everything I've said today, this is the part that I really want you to take away with you. And what it means is this: if reconciliation is something you're hoping for, then the work you do on yourself right now, in the middle of all this grief, is not separate from that chance of repair. It is actually the foundation. And if reconciliation is not possible or not something you even want, that same work is still the path to a life that feels genuinely worth living. So wherever you are in this, The work matters, you matter, and this grief, as heavy as it is, does not have to be the end of your story.